This is a painting of an American robin. It was done in transparent watercolor. It's a little one, 10 by 7 inches. A lot of detail though, so it was a fun one to work on. Robin's a beautiful little bird. Started with a wet wash on dry paper with several different greens, sprayed in a little bit of clear water and other greens to create some backgrounds that would suggest foliage in the background. Some of the greens were kind of brownish greens, others were more blue greens. Put in a couple of layers, hit it with the hair dryer, and then started putting some other darks in to suggest middle ground, some dark areas to recede way back in the background, some lighter colors to kind of pop forward that should match with the flowers when we put those in later. Hit it with the hair dryer and then peeled off the liquid frisket. There's no sketch under this now, so I had to transfer over the original drawing I did. So now I have the lines down. After transferring those, I can start putting in the local colors. And I try to cover as much of the paper as quickly as possible just to get all the colors starting to balance against each other. I don't want to leave white unless it's the white that's going to be on the bird at the end. So the petals I left alone first, but I wanted to get a lot of the other colors just established. It helps things kind of grow together as I paint. So right now I'm using, I think this was a number 4 round brush, a Series 7 Sable that's nice and sharp. These hold a lot of pigment. You can work pretty quickly, but it still has a nice sharp point to it, so you can get some of those details even though you're moving quickly. You can see my palette on the right. That's a butcher's tray. Those are kind of my favorite thing to paint from. Nice white, and they don't puddle up like some of the plastic ones do. Porcelain butcher's tray. Those are a great way to go. And I think I'm still with that number 4 round at this point, switching over a couple of little spots now being done with a tiny little brush. And this is a number 2 round I switched to at this point. And again, I'm trying to cover the paper and just build the big forms, glazing over it, going light to dark. So as I go, I start using slightly more opaque paints, and I'm using darker pigments as I go too. Mixing it thicker instead of lighter. For the whites of the flowers, I was using a lot of green, since that would be the reflected color from the all that green background. There's some blues in there too, just to give it a little personality. So right now, on this one, I'm using, I think that's a 5/0 brush just for the tiny little details. Most of this is being done with the number 2 round Series 7. And I often rotate the paper just so it's easier for me to paint. Whatever direction. Sometimes your hand wants to move in one direction better than others, so you just move the paper. And you can see my photo reference. That was taken with a 400 millimeter lens out the kitchen window of a nesting robin that was right by the house. So that was the main reference for this painting. And picking away at those little details. I had a teacher years ago, John Klossmeyer, who was a fantastic artist, and he said he was teaching gouache at that point, but he had a thing he said that I thought was very true and still think about a lot. And he said, you build a richness and a realism, and just by going over the same thing many times with many layers and a slow approach tends to build a lot more character to the painting than just painting it once and leaving it alone. And he definitely, his technique was really made that work well, and I kind of agree with that approach that he had. Um, and you'll see that you're really not painting one area once. You're going over it many, 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 many times, and that kind of builds up that detail and richness and textures, which kind of makes for a lot for the eye to look at. At least I like to look at it that way. So picking away at a lot of little details, and it's just a lot of time trying to make it look right. Um, the eye on this one, since it was kind of an overcast lighting situation, the specular highlight on the eye is you can see a lot of the reflected plants and things around it. So it has a softer highlight than you might see if you had a bright sunshiny day, where you'd have a crisper highlight. This one's a more diffuse highlight on the eye, which is a very different sort of treatment when you're painting eyes. There's no one formula that works for every eyeball, but in this lighting you wanted to have that diffused light, and so you have a little bit softer highlight on the eye and some reflected blues and greens from the environment that the bird was in. And the bird's belly had these little scalloped white edges to the robin's breast. You think of them as being kind of a uniform bricky red, but in reality they do have a little bit of fine white at the ends of the plumes. So that was kind of a challenge to paint, and that was mostly in oranges and yellows made with cadmium reds and yellows and a little bit of green to knock it back a little bit. And then purple in the shadows made a big difference. I also used alizarin crimson in some of the shaded areas, which with a lot of personality to the color, I thought. And I probably spent as much time on the leaves as I did the bird. The leaves and petals took a lot of time, a lot of fine detail that just had to be rendered. And there's an amazing amount of subtlety to the kind of browny blacks of the back of the bird. That was a challenge to do too, to kind of build that detail without just making it just some boring gray. Well, late in the painting, I was really just trying to move around and look for areas that kind of bothered me, things that needed a little bit of sharpening up, little edges that were a little ratty and needed to be cleaned and made sharper, and do most of that with a little brush and dark colors, fairly opaque darks, and just work around that painting until I run out of places that need a little bit of revision and a little bit of cleaning up. So I'm mostly adding little lines and things to sharpen up, maybe a crease in the feathers or a shadow underneath the toe, the line demarking a petal's edge. And eventually you run out of these little places that bothered you to work on, and you end up with the finished piece. Here I'm putting some more reds and oranges onto the breast, and I brought in a couple of purples that you can see on the right, and a little bit of alizarin comes in to add a little bit of color to those darker areas. At this point, I was pretty much finished with the thing. Just picked away at a couple other edges, and I was done. So that was the American robin on a crabapple tree. Thanks for watching. There's more info on this and other paintings on my website and the blog, so be sure to have a visit to find out more.